Hello there and welcome to this session on extrinsic factors. So the question is, describe and explain how extrinsic factors may influence the risk of injury. So let's revise extrinsic factors then. So let's look at the type of activity. Well, contact sports, for example rugby, are obviously going to impact and increase the risk of injury versus a sport such as ballet, netball, where you even get pulled up for contacting a player. All right, contact sports will increase the risk of injury. Coaching and supervision, so rules and regulations. Well, we have strict numbers of players allowed on any pitch. This limits overcrowding, which might cause collisions. There are rules for dangerous and foul play so that it stops it from happening. Think of high tackle in rugby, two-footed in football, not allowed. You have to wear compulsory protective equipment in some sports, for example, shin pads in football. That reduces the risk of injury. Then we have age and gender groups, so you don't see older people playing with children in football, rugby. You don't see men and women, elite rugby players playing together. Poor coaching techniques. So if your coach is rubbish at telling you what is the correct technique, you could be doing something that is really poor technique that could be leading to a further injury, especially an overuse injury. We've got ineffective communication skills. So if your coach cannot communicate with you effectively to tell you when you're doing something wrong, boom, that may lead to an injury. Safety checks. This should decrease the risk of injury because you're checking for things to make sure it is safe in the first place. And that links with a risk assessment. That is the process which highlights any hazards and puts in place preventative measures to reduce or remove those hazards, thus reducing the risk of injury. Then we've got emergency action plans. Well, they're in place so that everyone knows what to do and how to deal in an emergency situation. Then we've got equipment. So the stuff you play with, the performance equipment, a hockey stick, a cricket bat, they are hard, okay? They are wooden. They could have splinters in them. If you're swinging these around to hit a ball, you could catch another player and cause injury. Football studs, ouch, if someone stood on my foot wearing football studded boots, that is going to hurt. Then you've got protective equipment, so things that are in place to reduce the risk of injury. The shin pads I mentioned before in football, gum shields, helmets in cycling, all there to reduce that risk of injury. Our clothing and footwear, so padded clothing, that helps. People wear that under their rugby tops to help. Body armour, for example, a goalkeeper in hockey. Boots, alright, so your football boots are there to prevent injury, alright. Your studs are there to give you more grip so that you don't fall over as much. Socks, you might laugh and think, what's she on about socks for? Well, if you wear socks, you're less likely to get a blister, aren't you? Then we've got our environmental factors, so the other participants that may cause collisions on the pitch. Skill level. There's going to be more injuries at beginner level when they haven't got a clue what they're doing to the elite level. And then you've also got foul play, so other people doing foul play that injures you. Then you've got the weather. Oh, the lush weather in the summer when it's really, really hot. Obviously not the UK. But that causes the ground to be really hard, all right? If you're playing rugby and got tackled and fall onto a really hard ground, it's going to hurt. Also, if it's really hot and you're not drinking enough, you're going to become dehydrated. On the flip side, if it's really cold, it could lead to hypothermia. And if it's really cold, your muscles might stay cold, which means they're not as stretchy. If they're not as stretchy, it's more likely to get an injury like a strain, a teeth, or a torn muscle. Then you've also got, if there's lots of heavy rain, the ground becoming very wet and very slippy. You might go over on your ankle, that twist in action causing a sprain injury. Then you've got the playing surface itself. Does it suit the sport? Do you ever play rugby on concrete? No. Okay? It has to suit the sport. That's going to increase the risk of injury if it's not played on the correct type of surface. So we've got two command words in the question. One is describe, one is explain. So for describe, you need to give the main characteristics and the main points. For explain, you need to give detailed sentences. You need to give lots of reasons of how and why the risk of injury may increase or decrease. Our focus is the risk of injury, so remember saying how it increases or decreases, and then the topic has to be extrinsic factors. So if we look at the orange box mark scheme, if you want 7 or 8 out of 8, you need detailed knowledge and understanding, you need 3 or more developed points, and very few errors in your written communication. So blue box then, what is extrinsic factor? You need to identify that and then describe 3. So an extrinsic factor, this is something outside of the body which you cannot control. Now I've picked 3, remember you need 3 or more for the mark scheme. The weather, that is the climatic conditions of the environment. Protective equipment, that's your clothing or the equipment used or worn that is aimed to reduce the risk of injury. Okay? Adhering to rules and regulations, the codes of conduct or laws of the game. Then if we go over to the red box, then it says explain how 3 extrinsic factors can influence injury and apply specifically to sport and the risk of injury. So weather. There's an increased risk of dehydration if it's hot, and it can lead to a decrease in performance. Fainting and collapse may happen. You could slip or twist on the surface, okay, or the terrain if it's wet, icy or boggy, causing an injury which would be a sprain. If it's hard ground from frozen, okay, it could cause an injury if you fall on it. Protective equipment. It's compulsory to wear a helmet in motorcycle racing because that reduces the risk of concussion and skull fractures. You have to wear shin pads in football to reduce the risk of lower leg fractures in a tackle. Padding is placed around rugby posts to reduce the risk of injury if players run into them when scoring a try or avoiding a tackle. And then we've got adhering to rules and regulations. So there's rules for limiting the number of players on the pitch, which stops overcrowding and injuries occurring due to collisions. We've got rules for dangerous or foul play, for example, a high tackle in rugby. Age and gender groups, for example, adults cannot play children at rugby, and women and men cannot play rugby together, which reduces the risk of injury. That's everything on extrinsic factors. Bye for now.